To be some leads telling us that they may be investigating down across the border, south of the border. A source close to the investigation tells News Nation the FBI has contacted Mexican authorities in connection with this case. However, the Attorney General of the state of Sonora just released a statement saying that they have not to date received any formal request for collaboration, assistance, or exchange of information. However, this tells us that investigators are casting a wider net and are following leads that take them across the border at some.
The desert air in Tucson doesn't just carry the scent of creosote and dust. It carries the weight of a silence that has lasted nearly a month. It has been weeks since Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today's Show co-host Savannah Guthrie, vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills. For the family, the passage of time is a physical ache. For the investigators, it is a ticking clock that has begun to echo with the sounds of political infighting. As the sun dipped behind the rugged peaks of the Sonoran Desert, a new narrative began to flicker across news screens. The FBI was moving south. Sources close to the federal investigation whispered to national outlets that the Bureau was desperate to take the reins from local authorities. The theory was simple, if unproven. Nancy was no longer in Arizona. She was in Mexico. The logic cited the proximity of the border, just 60 miles away, and the cold reality that an 84-year-old woman does not simply evaporate into the desert without a vehicle or an accomplice. However, across the border in Hermosillo, the mood was not one of collaboration, but of indignation. Gustavo Romulo Salas Chavez, the Attorney General of Sonora, sat in an office where the air conditioning hummed against the blistering heat outside. He had seen the American news reports. He had heard the talking heads on cable news speculating about cartel involvement and cross-border abduction. Salas Chavez's response was a calculated strike against the American narrative. In a statement that sent shockwaves through the Pima County Command Center, he declared that Mexico had not been brought into the fold. While the FBI told the press they were reaching out, the man in charge of the very territory they were eyeing claimed the phone had never rung. To date, he stated with the cold precision of a veteran prosecutor, this institution has not received any formal request for collaboration. The firing back wasn't just about paperwork, it was about the perception of blame. Mexico was tired of being the default black hole where American cases went to die when domestic leads dried up. Salas Chavez was making it clear. If Nancy Guthrie was in Sonora, the Americans hadn't bothered to ask the people who actually ran the streets. In the windowless war room of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the air was thick with the hum of servers and the quiet tension of men who hadn't slept in 48 hours. Sheriff Chris Nanos, a man whose decades in Arizona law enforcement had weathered him like the desert itself, stood over a table strewn with maps. To his left sat a team of FBI agents, their suits a sharp, bureaucratic contrast to the tactical gear of the deputies. The rift that Mexico's Attorney General had hinted at was no longer just a diplomatic snub. It was an internal wildfire. Reports had begun to leak that the FBI was frustrated, claiming Nanos was imping the investigation. The bone of contention was a collection of physical evidence, specifically a discarded glove and DNA swabs taken from Nancy Guthrie's Catalina foothills home. The FBI wanted the items flown immediately to their premier laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. Nanos, however, had dug in his heels. He had already sent the evidence to a private lab in Florida. To the FBI, this was a territorial power play that risked slowing down a life-or-death search. To Nanos, it was about consistency. Why split your evidence between two different labs? He would later tell the press, his voice raspy with indignation. It adds an unnecessary step. We started with this lab, it's that simple. But in the world of high-profile abductions, nothing is ever simple. The FBI's frustration boiled over when anonymous federal sources told national outlets that Nanos was sidelining federal resources. They pointed to the fact that the FBI wasn't even given a copy of the DNA profile until days later. This wasn't just a disagreement over science. It was a battle over who owned the narrative of the rescue. The tension escalated when the FBI released a suspect profile without Nano's explicit blessing. A man, roughly 5'9", carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. The detail was forensic, cold, and effective. It made the sheriff's department look like they were playing catch-up, while Nanos defended his deputies, calling the accusations of a rift crazy stuff. The reality on the ground told a different story. Two parallel investigations were running, one local, one federal, and they weren't always talking to each other. As the sun rose over the Santa Catalina Mountains, the search for Nancy Guthrie was no longer just a hunt for a missing mother. It had become a showcase of the friction that occurs when a local lawman, my house, my rules philosophy meets the relentless, standardized machine of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For nearly 10 days, the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's residence was considered a dead end, a silent witness that had been systematically blinded. The suspect, displayed in grainy, leaked stills as a shadow and a mask, had seemingly outsmarted the tech. He had been seen at 1:47 a.m. on February 1, reaching for the lens with gloved hands, attempting to shroud the view with vegetation from Nancy's own garden. Then, the feed went dark. But the FBI's fresh eyes strategy wasn't just about personnel. It was about digital archaeology. While the Pima County Sheriff's Department worked the physical perimeter, the FBI's cyberforensics team began digging into the Google Nest backend. They discovered that even when a camera is disconnected or a subscription is inactive, residual data often lingers in the cloud, digital echoes of the moments before the hardware died. What they excavated changed the trajectory of the hunt. The recovered footage showed more than just a masked intruder. It revealed a calculated, armed individual. The suspect wasn't just a prowler. He was carrying a pistol in a holster and a very specific 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a black backpack sold by the thousands at Walmart, yet a crucial signature item in a case with no witnesses. As the FBI bypassed local bottlenecks to release this description to the public, a new, chilling detail emerged from the digital data. At 2:28 a.m., exactly 41 minutes after the camera was disabled, Nancy's pacemaker app disconnected from her phone. It was a digital heartbeat flatlining in the virtual world. The FBI realized that the victim's own medical device was now their most reliable tracking tool. While the sheriff's department was still arguing over whether the case was a random burglary gone wrong, the FBI was already coordinating with the Department of Defense to fly helicopters equipped with Bluetooth-detecting sensors over the rugged canyons. They were looking for a signal from a device buried within a human chest, a signal that was rapidly fatting. The tension between Nanos and the Bureau reached a boiling point. The feds were hunting a signal, while the sheriff was still looking for footprints. On February 8, the investigation took a turn that was as visceral as it was grim. While the world watched the foothills for a sign of movement, the Pima County Sheriff's Department turned its attention downward, to the septic tank in the backyard of Nancy Guthrie's own home. Under the unblinking eye of news drones, 3 detectives were seen prying open a heavy manhole cover in the dust. They weren't looking for a person. They were looking for what a person tries to erase. Dressed in forensic suits, they lowered a long probe into the dark sludge. The theory was a haunting one, that the masked prowler hadn't taken Nancy away but had disposed of evidence, or worse, directly on the property. Somebody may have flushed something thinking that would get rid of it, a former official noted, but a septic tank is a permanent record. The search yielded no immediate remains, but it signaled a shift in the investigation's focus. The inside-out approach began to ripple through the family's inner circle. For days, gossip had swirled about the lack of suspects, and on Saturday night, the pressure localized on the home of Nancy's other daughter, Annie Guthrie. For hours, officers were seen moving in and out of Annie's garage, eventually emerging with a silver Celebrite case, a high-tech tool used to crack encrypted digital data. The tension reached a fever pitch just 48 hours later. On a dusty stretch of road in Rio Rico, 60 miles south toward the border, tactical units swarmed a vehicle during a traffic stop. They detained a man and his family, leading to reports that a mother and her 2 sons were being questioned. The community held its breath. Was this the Mexico connection the feds had been whispering about? However, as the hours ticked by, the breakthrough began to dissolve. The man, a local delivery driver, was eventually released, protesting his innocence to any camera that would listen. The FBI and the sheriff's department were left with a haunting lack of clarity. The septic tank was empty, the Rio Rico lead had cooled, and the $6 million Bitcoin ransom deadline was looming. The investigation was widening, yet the trail felt colder than the desert night. As Monday, February 9, approached, the desert air felt increasingly claustrophobic. This was the final deadline set by the anonymous entity claiming to hold Nancy Guthrie. The demand was staggering: $6 million in Bitcoin, to be transferred to a specific digital wallet by 5:00 p.m. local time. For the Guthrie family, the digital ledger wasn't just a financial account. It was a ticking clock on a mother's life. Savannah Guthrie, normally the voice of composed authority on the Today Show, appeared in a series of raw, unscripted video messages alongside her siblings, Annie and Cameron. They weren't speaking to the public, they were speaking to a ghost. Standing shoulder to shoulder, their eyes weary from a week of sleeplessness, they addressed the masked man directly. "We received your message and we understand," Savannah said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "We are ready to talk. But we need to know, without a doubt, that she is alive and that you have her." The family's strategy was a heartbreaking gamble. They publicly committed to paying the ransom. "We will pay," Savannah declared. But they demanded the one thing the kidnappers had yet to provide: proof of life. They needed a sign that Nancy, an 84-year-old woman who relied on a pacemaker and the routine of her faith, was still breathing.
We want to thank all of you for the prayers for our beloved mom, Nancy. We feel them, and we continue to believe that she feels them too. Our mom is a kind, faithful, loyal, fiercely loving woman of goodness and light. She's funny, spunky, and clever. She has grandchildren that adore her and crowd around her and cover her with kisses. She loves fun and adventure. She is a devoted friend. She is full of kindness and knowledge. Talk to her and you'll see.
The light is missing from our lives. Nancy is our mother. We are her children. She is our beacon. She holds fast to joy in all of life's circumstances. She chooses joy day after day, despite having already passed through great trials of pain and grief. We are always going to be merely human, just normal human people who need our mom. Mama, if you're listening, we need you to come home. We miss you.
Our mom is our heart and our home. She is 84 years old. Her health, her heart is fragile. She lives in constant pain. She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive. She needs it not to suffer. We too have heard the reports about a ransom letter in the media. As a family, we are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk. However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know, without a doubt, that she is alive and that you have her. We want to hear from you, and we are ready to listen. Please reach out to us.
As the clock struck 5:00 p.m., the world watched the publicly viewable Bitcoin wallet address. It remained stubbornly at $0. No transactions, no movement. The deadline passed in a deafening silence. The FBI's hostage negotiators, who had been shadowing the family, knew that missed deadlines were often a psychological tactic, but in the shadow of the border, silence felt more like an ending than a negotiation. The desperation shifted from the screen to the ground as the FBI and local authorities faced a new wave of digital chaos. Ransom notes were no longer just coming to the family. They were being sent to media outlets like TMZ and KGUN9, each more graphic than the last. One note, received shortly after the deadline, shifted the goalposts, demanding a different cryptocurrency and detailing graphic consequences for the delay. The ghost in the machine was now screaming, and the Guthrie family was left in an agonizing limbo, clinging to the hope that their mother's strength would outlast the kidnapper's greed. As the search for Nancy Guthrie stretched into its third week, the investigation hit a wall that no amount of traditional police work seemed able to scale. The FBI's combined DNA index system, CODIS, the massive federal database of known offenders, had come back with a resounding silence. The mixed DNA samples recovered from Nancy's home and a discarded glove found 2 miles away were not in the system. The kidnapper, it seemed, was a ghost without a criminal record. Desperation breeds innovation, and on February 19, the FBI and Pima County officials announced a pivot to investigative genetic genealogy, IgG. This was the same high-tech family tree forensics used to catch the Golden State Killer and solve the Idaho student murders. By uploading the unknown suspect's DNA to commercial databases like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, investigators weren't looking for the kidnapper himself. They were looking for his third cousins, his great-aunts, his distant relatives. While the science offered a glimmer of hope, the public side of the case turned into a financial arms race. An anonymous donor, later revealed to be Milwaukee attorney Michael Huppy, stepped forward to add $100,000 to the existing reward. This surged the total bounty to over $200,000, and later reports suggested nearly $300,000 for any information leading to Nancy's location. "It really does take a village," the family remarked through their grief. But the village was becoming fractured. Even as the reward money climbed, political tensions flared at the highest levels. Former President Donald Trump weighed in, criticizing the disclosure of the high-tech methods being used, arguing that revealing the pacemaker tracking and genetic genealogy strategies only tipped off the captors. Sheriff Chris Nanos, however, remained focused on the biological breadcrumbs. He revealed that biological evidence, not belonging to Nancy, had been found inside the home. But even this hope was tempered by a grim reality. The lab was having trouble isolating the samples. The clock wasn't just ticking for Nancy. It was ticking for the integrity of the evidence itself. As the FBI began the painstaking process of building a genetic map of a monster, the Guthrie family was left to wonder if a distant relative's saliva sample from years ago would be the only thing that could lead them to their mother. While the geneticists in the lab worked to decode the suspect's past, the FBI and Pima County investigators were aggressively tracking his physical footprint through the retail heart of America. The breakthrough came not from a witness, but from the hardware. Analysis of the doorbell footage revealed that the intruder was wearing a very specific 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. This wasn't just any backpack. It was a brand sold exclusively at Walmart. Sheriff Chris Nanos, standing before a phalanx of microphones, called it one of the most promising leads to date. This wasn't a specialized piece of tactical gear used by a professional. It was a $30 item available to anyone with a few dollars and a lack of imagination. The FBI's response was a massive, data-driven dragnet. Agents descended on Walmart's corporate headquarters, securing records of every single Ozark Trail hiker pack sold in the Southwest over the previous 6 months. They weren't just looking for cash transactions. They were looking for digital breadcrumbs. Who bought the pack alongside a $10 universal handgun holster? Who purchased a black ski mask and heavy-duty gloves in the middle of a desert winter? The search became even more localized when reports surfaced that at the Walmart just a few miles from Nancy's Foothills home, these specific backpacks were kept locked behind glass. To purchase one, a customer would have needed to summon an employee, wait for a key, and crucially, stand directly under the store's high-definition surveillance cameras during the interaction. By the 3rd week of February, the Walmart lead had generated a list of nearly 40 persons of interest. FBI agents began visiting local gun stores, showing owners a list of names and asking for records of recent firearm or ammunition purchases. They were looking for a crossover, a name that appeared on both a backpack receipt and a gun store's ledger. The investigation had shifted from a frantic desert search to a methodical harvest of consumer data. The masked man had tried to disappear by wearing common, off-the-shelf items, but in doing so, he had tethered himself to the most sophisticated inventory tracking system in the world. The feds weren't just hunting a kidnapper anymore. They were auditing his life, one transaction at a time. As the investigation entered its 4th week, the Mexico question that had simmered since the first days of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance reached a boiling point. Despite the Pima County Sheriff's Department insisting there was no evidence Nancy had crossed the border, the FBI began operating on a different frequency. The Bureau's Hermosillo sub-office, located in the heart of Sonora, was quietly activated, creating a diplomatic friction that played out in the international press. The Mexican government's fire back became even more pointed. Secretary of Security Omar Garcia Harfuch and the Sonora Attorney General held firm. They had no record of Nancy Guthrie entering their territory. They characterized the American focus on Mexico as a distraction from the lack of progress in Arizona. To the Mexican authorities, it felt like a familiar script. Whenever a high-profile case stalled in the U.S., the blame was pushed south of the border. There is no line pointing to Sonora, Harfuch stated flatly to reporters in late February, effectively shutting the door on joint operations. Back in Tucson, the human cost of this jurisdictional chess match was becoming unbearable. Savannah Guthrie announced she would not be returning to her seat on the Today Show for the foreseeable future. The search had moved past the stage of breaking news and into the grim reality of a cold case. Sheriff Nanos admitted in a national interview that the mixed DNA found at the scene, the very evidence he had refused to give the FBI weeks earlier, was proving nearly impossible to isolate. He warned the family and the public that the technology required to delayer the DNA might take weeks, months, or even a year to yield a name. As of late February 2026, the case of Nancy Guthrie remains one of the most haunting mysteries in modern American crime. The $300,000 reward remains unclaimed. The Walmart lead has filtered through thousands of receipts without a smoking gun, and the 84-year-old grandmother remains missing. The story that began with a flickering doorbell camera has ended, for now, in a desert of uncertainty, where the only thing more vast than the landscape is the silence between the agencies sworn to protect the people within it.